Lena Moetti had stopped believing in luck 3 years ago. That was when her father died, leaving behind medical bills that swallowed her savings whole. When her younger brother, Matteo, was diagnosed with a chronic illness that demanded medication she couldn't afford. When the apartment they'd called home for 15 years became a place she fought to keep every month, scraping together rent from tips earned on soft feet and a tired smile. She worked doubles at Carmelo's Asterisk, a small Italian restaurant tucked between a pawn shop and a laundromat in the belly of the city. The kind of place where regulars knew her name, where the owner yelled too much but paid on time, where the smell of garlic and olive oil clung to her uniform long after her shift ended. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even comfortable. But it was hers, or at least, it was all she had left. Lena had learned to move through the world quietly. She didn't complain. She didn't dream. She simply endured, one shift at a time, one bill at a time, one breath at a time. Her hands knew the rhythm of carrying plates, pouring wine, wiping down tables. Her face knew the smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her heart knew the ache that never fully left. And yet, on the night everything changed, she had no idea that survival would demand something far greater than endurance. It was a Thursday. The restaurant was half empty, the kind of slow night where seconds stretched into minutes and the clock on the wall seemed to mock her. Lena wiped down a table near the window, her mind elsewhere, on Matteo's next doctor's appointment, on the envelope of overdue notices sitting on her kitchen counter, on the quiet, suffocating weight of never having enough. She didn't notice him at first. The man who walked through the door moved like he owned the air itself. Tall, dark-haired, with a presence that didn't ask for attention but commanded it anyway. He wore a black suit that fit too perfectly, a white shirt unbuttoned just enough to suggest ease, and a watch that probably cost more than Lena's yearly rent. His face was sharp, all angles and shadows, with eyes that seemed to see too much and reveal nothing. He sat at a corner table, the kind tucked away from prying eyes, and when his gaze met hers, Lena felt something she couldn't name, a chill, a pull, a warning. She approached with her notepad, her voice steady, professional. "Good evening. Can I start you off with something to drink?" He didn't look at the menu. He looked at her, and in that moment, Lena felt the air shift. "Before we go on, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below." His name was Dante Ricci. She didn't know that yet. She didn't know that he was a man whose name carried weight in circles she'd never touched, whose decisions shaped lives and ended them, whose world ran on power, loyalty, and fear. She didn't know that he had enemies who wanted him dead, or that tonight they were closer than he realized. All she knew was that something about him made her pulse quicken, not with attraction, though that would come later, but with instinct, the kind that told her to be careful, to keep her distance, to finish her shift and forget his face. But instinct, she would line, was not the same as fate. Dante ordered a whiskey, neat. He didn't say much. He didn't smile. He simply watched the street through the window, his fingers tapping lightly against the table, his jaw tight. Lena brought his drink and stepped back, ready to retreat into the safety of the kitchen. Then she saw them. 2 men, standing across the street. Their postures too stiff, their eyes too fixed. One of them reached into his coat, and Lena's stomach dropped. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She simply moved. Her hand reached out and gripped Dante's shoulder, her voice low and urgent. "Get out now." He turned to her, confusion flickering across his face, but she didn't wait for questions. She leaned in closer, her words quick and sharp. "Through the kitchen. Out the back. Go. Now." For a heartbeat, he hesitated. His eyes searched hers, calculating, assessing. Then he saw the fear in her face, not for herself, but for him, and something shifted. He stood. She led him through the narrow hallway, past the line cooks who barely looked up, past the dishwasher who hummed along to a radio that crackled with static. She pushed open the back door, and the cold night air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust. Dante stepped outside, then turned back to look at her. His gaze was heavy, Sharp. Unreadable. Why? Lena didn't answer. She couldn't. She didn't even know. She closed the door and locked it behind him. Minutes later, the two men walked into the restaurant. They scanned the room, their eyes hard, their movements deliberate. They asked the owner if he'd seen a man in a black suit. The owner shook his head. They left, and Lena, standing behind the counter with her hands trembling and her heart pounding, realized that she had just done something very, very dangerous. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he'd done or who wanted him dead. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her chest, that her life had just changed. Because men like that, men who moved through the world with that kind of weight, didn't forget, and neither did the people who hunted them. Lena couldn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the moment over and over. The way his eyes had locked onto hers. The way he'd listened without question, as if her word alone had been enough. The way he'd disappeared into the dark like smoke, leaving only silence behind. She told herself it didn't matter, that it was over, that she'd never see him again. But deep down, she knew better. The next morning, she woke to find an envelope slipped under her door. No name, no return address, just thick, cream-colored paper sealed with wax. Inside, a single sentence written in elegant script. Asterisk, you saved my life. I don't forget debts. Asterisk. And beneath it, a phone number. Lena's hands shook as she held the card. She wanted to throw it away, to pretend it had never arrived. But something stopped her. Curiosity, maybe, or fear, or the quiet thrill of being seen by someone who existed in a world she'd never dared to touch. She didn't call, but he found her anyway. 3 nights later, Dante Ricci walked into Asterisk Carmelo's Asterisk again. This time, he didn't sit in the corner. He sat at the bar, where she couldn't avoid him, where she had to look at him every time she passed, where his presence filled the room like gravity, pulling everything toward him. Lena's pulse quickened. She wiped down a glass that was already clean, her movements stiff, uncertain. She could feel his gaze on her, patient and unwavering. Finally, she approached. "Can I get you something?" "An answer," he said quietly. She set the glass down. "I don't owe you one." "No," he agreed, "but I owe you." Lena crossed her arms, trying to look braver than she felt. "Then we even. You don't need to come back." Dante's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened, just slightly, just enough. "It doesn't work that way." "Then how does it work?" He leaned forward, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You put yourself at risk for me. That makes you part of this now, whether you like it or not." The words landed like stones in her chest. "Part of what?" "My world." Lena took a step back. "I don't want any part of your world." "I know." He stood, buttoning his jacket with the kind of ease that made it clear he was used to getting what he wanted. "But the men who came looking for me, they saw you, and they don't forget either." Her blood went cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're not safe here anymore." The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Lena's breath came shallow and quick. "That's not my problem." "It is now." Dante reached into his pocket and pulled out a card identical to the one she'd found at her door. He set it on the bar between them. "When they come, and they will, call me." Then he turned and walked out, leaving her standing there with the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. If this story has already found a place in your heart, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more stories that stay long after they end. Lena didn't believe him. She told herself he was overreacting, that he was trying to scare her into what? She didn't even know. She threw the card in the trash and went about her life as if nothing had changed. But everything had. She started noticing things. A black car parked across the street that hadn't been there before. A man in a gray coat who lingered too long outside the pawn shop. Eyes that followed her as she walked home, heavy and deliberate. Matteo noticed too. "Lena, are you okay?" he asked one evening, his voice small and worried. She forced a smile. "I'm fine, Carino star. Just tired." But she wasn't fine. She was terrified. And when she came home one night to find her apartment door slightly ajar, the lock intact, but the air inside disturbed, her things subtly rearranged, she finally understood. They weren't coming. They were already here. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. She dug through the trash and found the crumpled card. She stared at the number for a long time, her thumb hovering over the screen. Then she dialed. He answered on the first ring. "Lena." The sound of her name in his voice, calm, steady, certain, nearly broke her. "They were in my apartment." A pause. Then, quietly, "Are you home now?" "Yes." "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone." "I'm coming." "Dante." "I'm coming." He hung up. Lena stood in the middle of her small living room, her heart pounding, her mind spinning. She didn't know what she'd just done. She didn't know what it meant to let him in. But as she heard footsteps in the hallway and saw shadows move past her window, she realized she had no choice. Because the world she'd tried so hard to stay out of had already decided she belonged to it. And the man who ruled that world was on his way. Dante Ricci arrived like a storm. Quiet, inevitable, and impossible to ignore. Lena heard the knock first. Firm. Controlled. Nothing like the hesitant taps of neighbors or the impatient pounding of debt collectors. She peered through the peephole and saw him standing there, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. She opened the door. He stepped inside without waiting for permission, his eyes sweeping the room in seconds. The overturned cushion, the drawer left slightly open, the faint scuff mark on the floor where someone had stood too long. He saw it all. He understood it all. Then he looked at her. Lena stood with her back against the door, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale. She looked smaller than she had at the restaurant, more fragile. And yet, there was still that spark in her eyes, the one that had made her warn him in the first place. "Did they touch you?" His voice was low, steady, but there was something underneath it, something sharp. She shook her head. "I wasn't here." "Good." He moved toward the window, glancing out at the street below. "Pack a bag. Essentials only." Lena blinked. "What?" "You're not staying here." I can't just leave. I have work. My brother." "Your brother comes too." Dante turned to face her, his gaze locking onto hers with a weight that left no room for argument. "They know where you live. They know where you work. If you stay, they'll use you to get to me, and I won't let that happen." Lena's chest tightened. "So what? You're just going to take me somewhere? Keep me locked up?" "I'm going to keep you alive." The words hung in the air between them, cold and undeniable. Lena wanted to fight. She wanted to tell him no, to reclaim the small scraps of control she'd spent years building. But she thought of Matteo asleep in the next room. She thought of the shadows outside her window. She thought of the men who'd walked into Carmelo's asterisk with murder in their eyes. And she realized she had no choice. "How long?" she asked quietly. Dante's expression softened. "Just barely. As long as it takes." Matteo woke confused and frightened when Lena shook him awake. "What's happening?" he whispered, his eyes wide. "We're going somewhere safe," Lena said, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. "Just for a little while." He looked past her to where Dante stood in the doorway, tall and silent and imposing. "Who's that?" "A friend." The lie tasted bitter. "He's going to help us." Matteo didn't argue. He'd learned long ago not to ask too many questions when Lena looked scared. They left through the back stairwell, moving quickly through the dark. A black car waited at the curb, sleek and expensive, with tinted windows that reflected nothing. A driver stood beside it, a man with a scar along his jaw and eyes that didn't smile. Dante opened the door for them. Lena hesitated for just a moment, her hand on Matteo's shoulder, her heart screaming at her to run. But where would she go? She climbed inside. The drive was long and silent. The city blurred past the windows, bright lights giving way to darker streets, then to roads lined with trees that swallowed the moonlight. Matteo fell asleep against her shoulder. Lena stared out at the night, her mind numb, her body exhausted. Dante sat across from her, his face half-shadowed, his gaze distant. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. When they finally stopped, it was in front of a house. No, an estate. Tall iron gates opened onto a long driveway lined with trees. The house itself was beautiful in a way that felt cold. Stone and glass and sharp angles, lit from within by warm light that didn't quite reach the edges. "This is where you'll stay," Dante said as they stepped out of the car. Lena looked up at the house, her stomach twisting. It was beautiful. It was safe. It was a cage. If you've ever felt torn between fear and love, you'll understand her. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Inside, the house was even more overwhelming. High ceilings, marble floors, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Everything was clean, precise, untouchable. A woman in her 50s appeared, severe but not unkind, and led Matteo to a bedroom upstairs. He looked back at Lena, uncertain, but she nodded. "It's okay. I'll be right here." When the door closed, it was just the two of them. Dante poured himself a drink at the bar in the corner. He didn't offer her one. "You'll be safe here. No one knows about this place except the people I trust." "And how many people is that?" Lena asked, her voice sharper than she intended. He looked at her over the rim of his glass. "3, including you." The word settled over her like a weight. "I didn't ask for this." "I know." "Then why am I here?" Dante set the glass down. He walked toward her slowly, stopping just close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the weariness in his eyes. "Because the moment you warned me, you became part of this, and I protect what's mine." Lena's breath caught. "I'm not yours." "Not yet." His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "But you will be." And for the first time since this nightmare began, Lena didn't know if she wanted to run from him or toward him. Time moved differently in Dante's house. Days blurred into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun through windows that Lena was never quite sure she was allowed to open. The rooms were beautiful, too beautiful. Every surface gleamed. Every piece of furniture sat perfectly in place. It was the kind of home that didn't feel lived in. It felt curated, controlled. Lena hated it, and yet she couldn't deny the safety it offered. Matteo had color in his cheeks again. He laughed more. He played in the garden under the watchful eyes of Dante's security, men who moved like shadows and spoke in low voices. He didn't ask when they were going home. Maybe he didn't want to know the answer. Lena, on the other hand, asked every day, "When can we leave?" Dante's answer was always the same: "Soon." But soon stretched into a week, then 2, then 3. She saw him every evening. He would return late, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up, exhaustion etched into the lines of his face. He never told her where he'd been or what he'd done, but she could see it in his eyes, the weight of decisions made, the blood he'd washed from his hands before walking through the door. He would pour himself a drink, sit in the armchair by the fireplace, and sometimes, if she was in the room, he would look at her, not with demand, not with possession, with something quieter, something that unnerved her more than anger ever could. One night, Lena couldn't take it anymore. She found him in his study, a room lined with books he probably never read and a desk covered in papers he definitely did. He looked up when she entered, his pen pausing mid-signature. "I need to go back," she said. Dante leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Back where?" "To my life, to work, to my apartment." Your apartment was broken into. Your job put you in the line of fire. That life isn't safe. It's mine. It was. He stood, moving around the desk toward her. It's not anymore. Lena's hands curled into fists. You don't get to decide that. I already did. The words were quiet, but they hit like a slap. Lena took a step back, her chest tight. You're keeping me here, against my will. Do you understand what that makes you? Dante's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold certainty she'd come to recognize. It makes me the man who's keeping you alive. Lena turned and walked out before she said something she couldn't take back. If your heart's racing too, take a breath, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more unforgettable love stories. But that night, something shifted. Lena woke to the sound of voices downstairs. Low, urgent. She slipped out of bed and crept to the top of the staircase, her heart pounding. Dante stood in the foyer, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was sharp, clipped. I don't care what it takes. Find them, before they find us. He hung up, ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time since she'd met him, Lena saw him look afraid. Not for himself, for her. She stepped back into the shadows, her pulse racing. She didn't know what he was protecting her from. She didn't know how deep the danger ran. But she knew, in that moment, that he wasn't keeping her here because he wanted to control her. He was keeping her here because he didn't know how to let her go without losing her. And that terrified her more than anything. The next day, Dante didn't leave. He stayed in the house, moving through the rooms like a caged animal, his phone ringing constantly, his face growing darker with every call. Lena watched him from the kitchen, where she sat with Matteo, helping him with the homework she'd insisted he keep up with. When Matteo went outside to play, Dante finally approached. You're angry, he said quietly. Lena didn't look up from the book she wasn't reading. I am a prisoner. You're protected. Same thing. Dante pulled out the chair across from her and Saturday. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. I had a sister once. Lena looked up, surprised. Her name was Julia. He stayed at his hands, his jaw tight. She was younger than me, bright, full of life. She wanted nothing to do with my world. I made show of it, kept her away from all of this, sent her to school in another city, gave her a life that was hers. He paused, swallowed. They found her anyway, used her to get to me. By the time I got there, it was too late. Lena's chest ached. She didn't know what to say. I won't let that happen again. Dante's eyes met hers, and in them, she saw a grief so deep it had no bottom. Not to you, not to your brother, even if you hate me for it. Lena's throat tightened. She wanted to stay angry. She wanted to hold onto her resentment like armor. But all she could see was the man in front of her, not a monster, not a captor, but someone who had lost everything and was trying desperately not to lose again. I don't hate you, she said quietly. Dante looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and walked away, leaving her alone with the realization that her feelings had become far more complicated than fear. The days that followed were different. Dante didn't try to justify keeping her there. He didn't offer empty promises about when she could leave. He simply existed alongside her, quietly, carefully, as if he knew that words would only build walls between them, and walls were the last thing either of them needed. Lena found herself noticing things she hadn't before. The way he always checked on Matteo before leaving the house, asking about his medication, his sleep, his mood. The way he left books on the table for her, not romance novels or fluff, but histories and memoirs, things with weight and substance. The way he never locked her door at night, even though he easily could have. He was giving her the illusion of choice in a place where she had none. And somehow, that made it worse, because it meant he understood. He knew what he was taking from her, and he was doing it anyway. One evening, Lena found him in the garden. It was late, the sky bruised purple and orange, the air cool. Dante stood near the edge of the property, looking out at the line of trees that separated his world from the rest of existence. He had a cigarette between his fingers, though he wasn't smoking it, just holding it, watching the ember glow. Lena approached slowly. "I didn't know you smoked." He glanced at her, then back at the horizon. "I don't. Not anymore. But sometimes I need to hold something that burns." The words hung in the air, raw and unexpected. Lena stopped beside him, close enough to feel the heat of him, far enough to pretend she wasn't drawn to it. "Why do you do this?" "Do what?" "All of it. The violence, the control, the empire." She gestured vaguely toward the house, the gates, the invisible weight of his world. "Why?" Dante was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost thoughtful. "Because it's all I know. My father built this. My grandfather before him. I didn't choose it. I inherited it. And by the time I understood what that meant, I was already too deep to get out." "You could walk away." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No, I couldn't. Men like me don't walk away. We die, or we become something worse." Lena turned to look at him fully. "You're not a monster, Dante." His gaze met hers, sharp and searching. "How do you know?" "Because monsters don't grieve." The words hit him like a blow. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand curled into a fist at his side. For a moment, she thought he might turn and walk away. Instead, he stepped closer. "You don't know me, Lena," he said quietly. "You don't know the things I've done." "Then tell me." He shook his head. "If I did, you'd never look at me the same way again." "Maybe I wouldn't." She held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "But at least I'd know the truth." Dante stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then he turned and walked back toward the house, leaving her standing alone in the fading light. And for the first time, Lena wondered if she wanted to know the truth, or if she was afraid of what it might change. Before we close this chapter, take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Every small gesture helps the next story find its way to you. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She wandered through the house, her bare feet silent on the cool floors. She passed Matteo's room, peeking in to see him curled up under the blankets, safe and peaceful. She passed the study, empty now, the papers on Dante's desk neatly stacked. She found herself at his door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. She should have walked away. She should have gone back to her room and forgotten the pull she felt toward him. But she didn't. She pushed the door open. Dante sat on the edge of his bed, his shirt unbuttoned, his head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Lena." "Don't." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Don't tell me to leave. Not tonight." He stood slowly, his eyes searching hers. "Why are you here?" "Because I don't know what I'm supposed to feel anymore." Her voice was quiet, but steady. "I should hate you. I should be planning how to escape. But instead, I'm here, and I don't know why." Dante took a step toward her, then stopped, as if afraid to get too close. "You should hate me. It would be easier." "For who?" "For both of us." Lena closed the distance between them, her heart pounding. "What if I don't want easy?" Dante's breath hitched. His hand reached up, hesitating just before touching her face. "If I touch you, I won't be able to let you go." "Then don't." His hand cupped her cheek, warm and rough and impossibly gentle. His thumb brushed across her skin, and she felt the world tilt. "Lena," he whispered, her name a prayer and a warning all at once. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She kissed him, and in that moment, the cage she'd been living in became something else entirely. Not a prison, not a sanctuary, but a choice. Everything changed after that night. Not all at once, not in grand declarations or dramatic shifts, but in the small, quiet ways that mattered most. Dante stopped keeping his distance. Lena stopped pretending she wanted him to. They moved around each other like magnets, drawn together even when logic screamed at them to pull apart. He would find her in the library, reading in the window seat, and sit across from her without speaking. She would brush past him in the hallway, and their fingers would graze, and neither would pull away. Matteo noticed. "You smile more now," he said one morning over breakfast. Lena looked up, surprised. "Do I?" He nodded. "You look lighter." She didn't know how to tell him that lighter felt like falling, because that's what this was, a free fall, and she had no idea where she'd land. Dante's world began to open to her in pieces, not because he wanted to show her, but because she insisted on seeing. One evening, she followed him to his study and refused to leave when he told her to. She sat in the chair across from his desk and waited. He sighed, setting down his pen. "This isn't a place for you." "Then make it one." He looked at her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. Then he pulled out a file and slid it across the desk. "This is what I've been dealing with." Lena opened it. Inside were photos, reports, names she didn't recognize. But the pattern was clear: betrayal. Someone inside his organization was feeding information to his enemies. Someone close. "Who?" she asked quietly. "I don't know yet. But when I find out—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Lena closed the file, her stomach twisting. "And when you do find out, what happens to them?" Dante's jaw tightened. What has to happen? She wanted to argue, to tell him there had to be another way, but she'd seen enough of his world now to know that mercy was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. Instead, she asked, "And what happens to us when this is over?" Dante looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't know." It was the first honest answer he'd ever given her. That night, Dante took her somewhere she never expected, a church. It was small, old, tucked away in a part of the city she didn't recognize, the kind of place that still smelled of incense and old wood, where candles flickered in the dark and prayers lingered in the air. They sat in the back pew, side by side, not touching. "I haven't been here in years," Dante said quietly. "Not since Julia's funeral." Lena didn't speak. She just listened. "I used to believe in something," he continued. "God. Redemption. The idea that good men got rewarded and bad men got punished. Then my sister died, and I realized none of it mattered. The world doesn't care if you're good. It only cares if you're strong." "You don't believe that," Lena said softly. He looked at her. "Why not?" "Because if you did, you wouldn't have saved me." Dante's breath hitched. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he reached for her hand. And in the quiet of that old church, with the weight of his world pressing down on them both, Lena felt something shift. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of it. If you've ever felt torn between fear and love, you'll understand her. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. The danger, however, was never far behind. Lena woke one night to the sound of shouting. She bolted upright, her heart racing, and ran to the window. Outside, the estate was flooded with light. Men moved through the garden, their voices sharp, their weapons drawn. She threw on a robe and ran downstairs. Dante stood in the foyer, fully dressed, his face cold and hard. He was issuing orders to the men around him, his voice clipped and controlled. When he saw her, his expression shifted, just for a second, before hardening again. Go back upstairs. What's happening? Now, Lena. But she didn't move. She couldn't, because over his shoulder, she saw them dragging someone through the door. A man, blooded, beaten, barely conscious. Dante followed her gaze, then stepped in front of her, blocking her view. Upstairs. Please. The word please broke something in her. She nodded and turned, but not before she heard the man speak. You can't protect her forever, Dante. They know where she is. They know what she means to you. Lena froze. Dante's voice was ice. Take him to the basement. And as they dragged the man away, Lena realized the truth she'd been trying to avoid. She wasn't just trapped in Dante's world. She was the reason his enemies wouldn't stop. The man in the basement haunted Lena. Not his face. She hadn't seen enough of it to remember. But his words. They echoed in her mind, over and over, until they became a truth she couldn't escape. Asterisk, they know what she means to you. Asterisk. Lena had believed, until that moment, that she was collateral damage. A witness who'd gotten too close. A liability Dante was protecting out of obligation, maybe guilt, maybe even something softer. But now she understood. She wasn't a liability. She was a target. And the reason was simple, terrifying, undeniable. Dante cared about her. And in his world, caring about someone was the same as painting a target on their back. She stayed away from him for 2 days, not because she was afraid of him, but because she was afraid of what being near him meant. Every moment they spent together, every touch, every look, it made her more valuable to his enemies. It made Matteo more vulnerable. It made the cage around them tighter. Dante noticed. Of course he did. On the 3rd day, he found her in the garden. She was sitting on a stone bench beneath a tree, her arms wrapped around herself, her gaze distant. He didn't ask permission. He simply sat beside her. They were silent for a long time. Finally, Lena spoke. You should let us go. Dante's jaw tightened. No, they're using me to get to you. If I'm gone. If you're gone, they'll find you anyway, and I won't be there to stop them. Lena turned to look at him. So what's the plan, Dante? Keep me locked up forever? Watch Matteo grow up behind gates and guards? Pretend this is a life? It's better than the alternative. Is it? Her voice cracked, because from where I'm sitting, it feels like we're all just waiting to die. Dante flinched. It was subtle, barely there, but she saw it. I won't let that happen. You can't promise that. I can, and I will. He turned to face her fully, his eyes burning with something fierce and desperate. I have spent my entire life taking things from people. Power, loyalty, fear. But you, he stopped, his voice rough. You're the first thing I've ever wanted to protect. And I will burn the entire world down before I let anyone take you from me. Lena's breath caught. The words should have terrified her. They should have sent her running. But they didn't, because buried beneath the violence and the possessiveness, she heard something else. Love, raw, unpolished, dangerous, but love nonetheless. You can't burn the world down, Dante, she said softly. You'd burn us with it. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle despite the storm in his eyes. Then tell me what to do. Tell me how to keep you safe without losing you, because I don't know anymore. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Lena saw him for what he truly was. Not a mafia boss, not a captor, not even a protector, just a man, broken and desperate and terrified of losing the one thing he'd let himself care about. That night, everything fell apart. Lena was in Matteo's room, reading to him before bed, when she heard the first gunshot. It was distant, sharp, unmistakable. Matteo's eyes went wide. Lena. It's okay. She kept her voice calm even as her heart hammered. Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Dante. But, Matteo, please. He nodded, fear written across his young face. Lena ran into the hallway. The house had erupted into chaos. Men were shouting. Footsteps thundered through the corridors. More gunshots echoed from somewhere outside. She found Dante in the foyer, surrounded by his men, his gun drawn, his face a mask of controlled fury. "How many?" he barked. "At least a dozen. Maybe more." They breached the east gate. Dante's eyes swept the room and landed on Lena. His expression shifted, just for a second, fear breaking through the armor, before hardening again. "Get her to the safe room. Now." Two men moved toward her, but Lena stepped back. "I'm not leaving Matteo. He's already there." Marco took him the moment this started. Dante crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. "Lena, you need to go. Now." "What about you?" "I'll handle this." "Dante." He grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm but not painful. His eyes burned into hers. "I need you safe. Please, let me do this one thing right." Before she could answer, the front door exploded inward. Men poured through, masked, armed, moving with military precision. Dante shoved Lena behind him, raising his gun, and the world erupted into violence. Gunfire, shouting, the smell of smoke and blood. Lena pressed herself against the wall, her hands over her ears, her mind screaming. Dante moved through the chaos like a force of nature. Every shot he fired found its mark. Every command he gave was obeyed without question. He was terrifying. He was magnificent. He was everything she'd feared and everything she'd fallen for, all at once. But there were too many of them. Lena saw it before he did. A man slipping through the side entrance, raising his weapon, aiming at Dante's back. She didn't think. She screamed, "Dante!" He turned, saw the threat, fired, but not before the other man did. The bullet grazed Dante's shoulder, spinning him back. He stumbled, his gun clattering to the floor. And in that moment, Lena understood. This was never going to end. Not unless they ended it. Not unless she ended it. Time slowed. Dante hit the ground, blood blooming across his shoulder, his face twisted in pain. His men swarmed forward, returning fire, dragging him back. The air was thick with smoke and screams and the acrid smell of gunpowder. And Lena stood frozen, watching the man who'd promised to protect her bleed. Something inside her snapped. She ran, not away, toward. One of Dante's men tried to grab her, but she twisted free. She dropped to her knees beside Dante, her hands pressing against the wound, her voice sharp and commanding. "How bad is it?" He looked up at her, his eyes hazy with pain. "You need to go. Safe room. Now." "Shut up." She turned to the nearest guard. "First aid kit. Now." The man hesitated, looking between her and Dante. "Now," she shouted. He ran. Dante's hand caught her wrist, his grip weak but insistent. "Lena, please." "I'm not leaving you." Her voice cracked. "I'm not." The guard returned with the kit. Lena's hands shook as she pulled out gauze and bandages, pressing them against the wound with more force than grace. Dante hissed, his body going rigid. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Tears streamed down her face, but her hands didn't stop moving. "You don't get to die. Do you hear me? You don't get to bring me into this world and then leave me in it alone." Dante's eyes locked onto hers. Even through the pain, she saw the depth of what he felt. "I won't." The gunfire was dying down. Dante's men had pushed the attackers back, but the damage was done. Bodies littered the foyer. Blood stained the marble floors. The house that had been a gilded cage now looked like a battlefield. And Lena realized, as she tied off the bandage with shaking hands, that this was her life now. This violence, this fear, this constant edge of disaster, unless she changed it. 3 days later, Dante was on his feet, against the doctor's orders, against his men's protests, against every reasonable instinct. But reasonable had never been part of his vocabulary. Lena found him in his study, standing at the window, his arm in a sling, his face pale but determined. "You should be resting," she said. "I should be ending this." He didn't turn around. "They came into my home, Lena. They came for you, and they'll keep coming until I stop them. So stop them." He finally looked at her. "That's what I'm trying to do." Lena crossed the room and stood beside him. "Then let me help." Dante's expression hardened. "Absolutely not. You don't get to decide that." "The hell I don't. You're not getting anywhere near." "I'm already near it, Dante." Her voice rose, sharp and furious. "I'm living in it. I'm bleeding from it. Matteo is traumatized because of it. You don't get to keep me wrapped in cotton while you bleed out in front of me and call that protection." Dante stared at her, his jaw tight, his breathing heavy. "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to trust me." "I do trust you." "Then prove it." Lena held his gaze. "Let me in. All the way. Let me stand beside you instead of behind you. Because that's the only way this works. That's the only way we survive." For a long moment, Dante said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded. The plan was dangerous, insane, even, but it was the only option they had. The traitor in Dante's organization had been found, a man named Carmine, one of his oldest allies, bought by his enemies with promises of power. He'd been feeding them information for months. Locations, schedules, weaknesses. He was the reason the attack had been so coordinated. And he was the key to ending this. Dante wanted to kill him. To make an example. To remind the world what happened when you betrayed him. But Lena had a different idea. "Use him," she said. "Feed him false information. Make him he's still useful. And when his buyers come to collect, you'll be waiting." Dante studied her for a long time. "That's actually brilliant." "I have my moments." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You have more than moments." If you've ever felt torn between fear and love, you'll understand her. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. They put the plan into motion that night. Carmine was brought to the study, his hands bound, his face defiant. He looked at Dante with something between hatred and fear. Dante sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "You betrayed me." Carmine said nothing. "I should kill you for that." Dante's voice was cold, measured. "But I'm going to give you a choice. You can die tonight, or you can help me end this and live." Carmine's eyes narrowed. "What's the catch?" "No catch. You feed them what I tell you to feed them. You set up the meeting. And when it's over, you disappear. New name, new life, somewhere far from here. And if I say no," Dante leaned forward, "then you don't leave this room." The silence stretched. Finally, Carmine nodded. Lena watched from the corner, her heart pounding. She didn't know if this would work. She didn't know if Carmine could be trusted, even with a gun to his head. But it was their best shot, and as Dante's eyes met hers across the room, she saw something she'd never seen before. Hope. The meeting was set for 3 days later, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, the kind of place that had seen too much blood to remember names or faces. Neutral ground, or as neutral as ground could be in a world where trust was currency and betrayal was common as breathing. Dante's enemies would come expecting Carmine to deliver him on a silver platter. Instead, they'd walk into a trap. The days leading up to it were tense. Dante barely slept. He moved through the house like a shadow, checking and rechecking every detail, every weapon, every contingency. His men trained. His plans evolved. And through it all, Lena watched. She wasn't just a spectator anymore. She was part of this. Dante had let her in, And now she saw everything, the strategy, the risk, the weight of decisions that could mean life or death. It terrified her. It also made her realize how strong she'd become. The night before the meeting, Lena found Dante on the rooftop. He stood at the edge, looking out at the city lights that stretched to the horizon. The wind pulled at his shirt, his hair. He looked tired, human, vulnerable in a way she rarely saw. She walked up beside him. "Can't sleep." "Never could. Not before something like this." They stood in silence for a moment, the city humming below them. "Are you afraid?" Lena asked quietly. Dante glanced at her. "Always." "You don't look it." "That's the point." He turned to face her fully. "Fear is useful. It keeps you sharp. But if you show it, you're already dead." Lena nodded slowly. "And after tomorrow, if this works?" "If this works, the people who came after you will be gone. The threat ends." "And us?" The question hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. Dante reached out, his hand cupping her face with a tenderness that broke her heart. "I don't know how to give you a normal life, Lena. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. But if you'll have me, broken, dangerous, and damned, then I'm yours." Lena's throat tightened. She'd spent so long resenting him, fearing him, trying to escape him. But somewhere along the way, he'd become the one thing she couldn't imagine living without. "Then I'm yours too," she whispered. He kissed her then, not with desperation or possession, but with something quieter, something that felt like a promise. And for one perfect moment, standing on that rooftop beneath a sky full of stars, they weren't a mafia boss and a captive. They were just two people trying to survive the storm. The warehouse was cold and dark when they arrived. Dante's men had positioned themselves hours earlier, on rooftops, in shadows, behind crates and broken machinery. Invisible, lethal. Carmine stood in the center of the space, his hands unbound now, his face pale. He knew that one wrong move would end him. That Dante's mercy only stretched so far. Lena wasn't supposed to be there. Dante had forbidden it. Demanded she stay at the house with Matteo, safe and far from the violence. But she'd followed anyway, hidden in one of the vehicles, watched from a distance as his men moved into position, because she needed to see this end. She needed to know, with her own eyes, that it was over. Dante spotted her just before the enemies arrived. His expression went from shock to fury to resignation in the span of a heartbeat. He strode over to where she crouched behind a pillar. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Making sure you come back," she said simply. He looked like he wanted to argue, to drag her back to the car and lock her inside. But there was no time. Headlights cut through the darkness. 3 cars, maybe 15 men, armed to the teeth. Dante's hand found hers for just a second. A squeeze, a promise. Then he let go and stepped into the light. The leader of the enemy group was a man named Voss. Tall, scarred, eyes like chips of ice. He approached Carmine first, his gaze assessing. "You have what we agreed on." Carmine nodded, his voice steady despite the fear Lena could see in his eyes. "Ricky's location, his schedule, everything. And he suspects nothing." "Nothing?" Voss smiled. It was the kind of smile that promised pain. "Good. Then after tonight, he's a dead man. There's just one problem with that plan." Dante's voice cut through the warehouse like a blade. He stepped out of the shadows, flanked by a dozen armed men. His face was calm, cold, the face of a man who'd already won. Voss's expression shifted, surprise, then understanding, then rage. "You. Me." Dante's gun was already drawn. "Did you really think I wouldn't know? That I wouldn't plan for this?" Voss raised his weapon, but Dante was faster. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse. Voss dropped, and then all hell broke loose. Lena pressed herself against the pillar, her heart hammering as gunfire erupted around her. She couldn't see Dante anymore, couldn't hear him over the chaos. She could only trust that he was alive, that he was fighting, that he would survive. A hand grabbed her arm. She spun, ready to scream, and found herself face to face with one of Voss's men. His eyes were wild, his gun raised. Time slowed. Lena didn't think. She grabbed a metal pipe lying nearby and swung with everything she had. It connected with his head. He went down hard. And Lena stood there, shaking, staring at what she'd just done. She'd hurt someone, maybe killed them. To survive, to protect, to become part of the world she'd once feared. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence was deafening. Lena stumbled out from behind the pillar, her legs weak, her vision blurry with tears. And then she saw him, Dante, standing in the center of the warehouse, blooded but alive, his eyes scanning the carnage until they found her. He crossed the distance in seconds and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered against her hair. "You should never have been here." "But I was," Lena said, her voice breaking. "And I'm still here, and I'm not leaving." Dante pulled back just enough to look at her, and in his eyes, she saw everything. Relief, fear, love. "It's over," he said, and for the first time in months, Lena believed him. 3 months passed. The warehouse, the bodies, the blood. They became memories that faded slowly, like bruises healing beneath the skin. Voss's organization crumbled without him. The men who'd come for Dante either died that night or scattered, too afraid to regroup. The threat that had hung over Lena's head like a blade finally, mercifully, lifted. But freedom, she learned, was more complicated than she'd imagined. Dante kept his promise. He gave her a choice. She could leave, take Matteo, return to her apartment, her job, her life before all of this. He would make sure she was protected, from a distance, invisible, never interfering. He would let her go, or she could stay, not as a prisoner, not as someone he kept locked away for her own good, but as someone who chose him, who chose this life, with all its darkness and danger and impossible complications. Lena didn't answer right away. She spent days thinking, walking through the estate that no longer felt like a cage, watching Matteo laugh as he played in the garden, healthier and happier than he'd been in years, sitting in the library where she'd first realized she was falling for a man she should have hated. And she thought about Dante, about the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in his world that made sense. About the way he'd bled for her, killed for her, nearly died for her. About the way he'd let her see him, not the monster, not the boss, but the man beneath. Finally, one evening as the sun set over the city, she found him in his study. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the fear in his eyes, the vulnerability, the knowledge that whatever she said next would determine the rest of his life. "I'm staying," Lena said simply. Dante stood slowly, as if he didn't quite believe her. "Are you sure?" "No." She walked toward him, closing the distance between them. "I'm terrified of this life, of what it means, of what it might cost. But I'm more terrified of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been." Dante reached for her, his hands framing her face. "I can't promise you easy. I can't promise you safe. I know. But I can promise you this. I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you, and I will never, ever let anyone hurt you again." Lena smiled, even as tears blurred her vision. "That's all I need." He kissed her then, and in that kiss was everything they'd survived, everything they'd become, and everything they still had to discover. Time moved differently after that. Not slower, not faster, just different. Lena didn't return to * Carmelo's star. She didn't go back to the apartment with the overdue bills and the broken locks. That life belonged to someone else now, someone smaller, someone who hadn't yet learned how strong she could be. Instead, she built a new life. She helped Dante run parts of his organization that didn't involve violence. The legitimate businesses, the investments, the parts of his empire that existed in daylight. She was good at it, better than either of them expected. She had a mind for numbers, for strategy, for seeing patterns others missed. Matteo thrived. He went to a private school where no one knew his last name or where he came from. He made friends. He laughed. He talked about becoming a doctor someday, about helping people the way others had helped him. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, Lena would find Dante on the rooftop where he'd first told her he was hers. They would stand together, looking out at the city, not speaking, not needing to, because they both understood now that love wasn't always gentle. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes it was born in fire and blood and fear. Sometimes it was choosing someone despite the darkness, not because of the light. And sometimes the cage you thought would trap you became the place where you finally learned to fly. If stories like this linger in your heart long after they end, don't leave just yet. Like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below, and let the next story find you when the night grows quiet again. Years later, when people asked Lena how she and Dante met, she never told the truth. She never mentioned the restaurant, the danger, the months she'd spent as his captive, the warehouse, the blood. She simply smiled and said, "He walked into my life when I least expected it, and somehow he never left." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough, because the woman who'd once served him whiskey and saved his life without knowing why, that woman didn't exist anymore. She'd been transformed by fire, reshaped by choice, reborn by love. And the man who'd once believed he was beyond redemption, he'd learned that some debts could never be repaid, only honored. That some lives were worth more than empires. That some love was worth any price. They weren't perfect. They argued. They struggled. There were nights when Lena still dreamed of gunfire, when Dante still woke reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. But they were together, and in the end, that was enough. Because love, they discovered, wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth surviving for, someone worth becoming better for, someone who saw all your shadows and chose to stand in them anyway. And on quiet nights, when the city hummed below and the stars burned bright above, Lena would take Dante's hand and remember the waitress who'd whispered, "Get out now." Remember the choice she'd made to stay. Remember that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let yourself fall. And sometimes, falling is the only way to learn you can fly. The story of Lena Moetti and Dante Ricci didn't end with happily ever after. It ended with something better. It ended with choice, with survival, with a love that refused to be contained, controlled, or conquered. A love that simply was, and would always be,